Hi, and welcome to No Budget. This month I am talking with Terry McMahon, director, writer extraordinaire, probably most well known for his two films, Charlie Casanova and Patrick's Day. Would that be fair in saying?
Only two films, yeah.
Only two films. All right. Well, and you're also a teacher and writer. I think you wrote for what's the soap opera that everybody loves here?
Fair City.
Yeah, Fair City. You wrote for Fair City, right?
Days of Our Lives.
Days of Our Lives. Nice. Really?
The Irish version.
My mother used to watch Days of Our Lives.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
That makes a lot of
US
sense.
version. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, let's get into it. So first, tell us a little bit about what got you into filmmaking and what motivated you to go into an industry where you really have no hope of ever making any money.
Thanks, Dad. uh, you're literally right, accurate in terms of that privileged sense of being able to enter a so-called industry that you've no right to enter. But I was homeless for a while and I wanted to somehow stop being a ghost in my own life. Mm-hmm. And even though I had no qualifications or no right on any level to believe I had the privileged sense of entering a world, I started to write a first script because I thought if I create something on paper, maybe it might lead to something that will take me out of being a ghost in my own life. Mm-hmm. And that became, many years later, my first screenplay.
Okay. That would be Charlie Casanova?
No, it was a script called The Dance Hall Bitch.
Okay.
And that script, somebody handed that script to somebody, and one of those bizarre scenarios, Daryl Hannah got her hands on it, and she flew me over to Los Angeles to write a screenplay for her.
Nice.
So you're living in a corporation bedsit, and at the same time you're flying first class to LA. Mm-hmm. And it's that constant counterbalance between the two of them that seems to have been ongoing since then.
Interesting. So I'm curious about that. So when you kind of got into the field, you don't have a lot of formal education in filmmaking. Do you feel that has made you different in regards to a filmmaker? A lot of, you see nowadays, I know in the corporate world and a little bit in filmmaking, I know a couple people have their, masters in whatever, and they kind of carry it with pride, and I don't know if it necessarily makes them a better filmmaker. Do you think people learn anything by going the formal education route, or is it more of a...
I'm not opposed to formal education or academia. Mm-hmm. Long after the fact, I got a master's degree in screenwriting from IADT, and it's a first-class honors master's degree, and it means utterly nothing. Yeah. When you sit in front of a blank page and you have to start all over again. But the benefit of academia is that it can take somebody from a position of knowing nothing to giving them the theoretical and occasionally pragmatic combination of forces that allows them to think maybe they have the capacity to do it. Mm-hmm. So that alone makes them worthwhile. Okay. Does it make you a filmmaker or a writer? Not at all. Mm-hmm. Can you teach talent? Not at all. But you can teach form and structure, and you can give somebody the tools to be able to apply what was formerly an abstraction that is the first step toward making it real.
Let's jump into your films. The first one is Charlie Casanova. What kind of motivated you to write that one, and tell us a little bit about that one?
Charlie Casanova it was written about 9 years ago, and it was written at a time when terms like controlling class were regarded as conspiracy theories. Mm-hmm. And my rage at my own cowardice and my disgust at the kind of scum who were determining our future combined into this rage-fueled screenplay that I knew nobody would ever make. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, I am a unashamed hack whore for hire. Mm-hmm. But if I am ever going to direct a film, now is the time. So I put a Facebook post up, intend making no budget to feature Charlie Casanova, need cast, crew, equipment, and a lot of balls. Mm-hmm. This is sincere, so bullshit is fuck off in advance. And I posted it at 2 o'clock in the morning with a glass of whiskey and was instantly embarrassed by it. And when I went to delete it, someone popped up, and then over the next 24 hours, 72 people popped up, and then 100 people popped up, and then suddenly 2 weeks later with borrowed cameras were on a first day of principal photography set with a whole bunch of crazies that I'd never met before. Mm-hmm. And we shot it in 11 days, and it became one of those bizarre scenarios where you end up with a film that will probably end up in your drawer. Instead, it was picked up for world premiere at South by Southwest, and then was picked up for distribution by Studio Canal. Mm. So it becomes that crazy story of the impossible becoming possible, and then at its highest point getting shot. And the film was one of the most hated films ever made.
People do seem to hate it for some reason, which is interesting. Do you think that potentially feeds the popularity of the film, though? Because there's that whole,
So there's no such thing as bad publicity.
There you go.
But anyone, whoever said that, doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. Because there is such thing as bad publicity. My mother loved the film. Actually, no, she fucking hated it too. It's one of those things where it's a divisive film, and it was set out to be divisive, and it was set out to be, the only way I can phrase it is, you pull the pin from a grenade and you throw it into a group and see what happens. It was never intended to be placatory or to allow the audience to have its genitalia tickled on the way to understanding its form or structure. The bizarre thing is that those who hated with such a level of rage that there was fist fights at film festivals. There was a level of almost comic book rage. There were two guys in particular, for whatever reason, when it came out on DVD, used to go into Tower Records and HMV because it was in the top 10 sellers at the time, and they took it out of the shelf and hid it behind other obscure films at the back of the shelf. And they did it every day. And I asked the guy in HMV, what's happening? And he says, we have no idea. He thought it was hilarious and strange. So people seem to take it very personally, and for me, in a very exciting way. If you make a divisive film and it's embraced, you failed. If you make a divisive film and it generates that level of ambivalence, extreme ambivalence, then it's the beginning of a necessary conversation. And bizarrely, the film had remarkable champions and won a whole bunch of awards and all that kind of nonsense. But at the same time, now there's a revisionism that's occurring, because what was deemed to be so naive in terms of conspiracy theory is now the front of the Irish Times in terms of the scum who are defining the country and our destiny.
Do you take any of that to heart, like any negative feedback to heart? I know a lot of people, especially like as creatives, to be creative, you need to be a little bit more in touch with your emotions. Does any negative feedback kind of get to you, or?
Well, the trolling, I'd never really knew what trolling was.
Yeah.
And then when you're in the middle of that shitstorm, you start going, okay, these people are taking it personally, and you got to take it on the chin. But then when you're on the national airwaves and you have people like Joe Duffy and people like Tom Dunn literally viciously attacking your character and defining that central character, Charlie Casanova, as being who you are, and making statements that your children are hearing or they're talking about in the kids' schools, it becomes a little bit crazy. And I remember on the day of its release, its cinema release, I remember walking through town and going, I need to get out of town. I'm actually frightened. And I'm sure a lot of it was paranoia and projection on my own part, but you realize there's this national conversation that's happening in the Irish Times, happening on the national airwaves, that's about the decimation of a small film. And these are shows like Joe Duffy's show that never ever discusses cinema, suddenly attributing a half an hour of its show to insisting that this film is not just putrid rubbish, but that you should not go and see it. And that's a fascinating thing to discover, because a film about how the controlling class destroy the working class manifested in its very release.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting too, because it is, since I moved to Ireland, it is something that is on people's mind, and that whole class separation that I think goes to the history of the country. And so it is interesting how that's still a conversation even nowadays.
Well, not even still, it's the only conversation. The reality of how the controlling class is destroying not just our culture, but defining our destiny in a deeply destructive way. For me, the only Irish filmmaker who seems to be, beyond Jim Sheridan, who's a great genius of a filmmaker, but in the next generation, the only filmmaker who seems to be trying to engage in the politics of our nation is Lenny Abrahamson. And obviously a magnificent and deserved success. But when you look at Lenny Abrahamson had released What Richard Did at essentially the same time as Charlie Casanova. And both of them were born out of the same event that happened in the Annabelle nightclub, where a young kid was destroyed by a bunch of upper class kids.
Okay.
And that impetus, that first seed to become two entirely different films, it was interesting that a film like What Richard Did is profoundly embraced, and a film that comes from the same source material, Charlie Casanova, was profoundly rejected. And for me, it's very interesting to see, okay, what is that thing that generates in us that level of acquiescence and acceptance, or that level of rage where we're willing to destroy the very thing that is trying to hold up a mirror to our own collective cowardice and my own personal cowardice.